Hello friends, and welcome back to the Mothership. Today we're going to smoke a pulled pork on the Weber Kettle with an SnS insert, and then to finish it off we're going to make some delicious pulled pork Bao Buns. Let's get started. This is a 7-pound bone-in pork butt. Let's get her out of cryovac and see how we're working with. Now pulled pork butt is really one of the most forgiving things you can do. It requires usually very little trimming. I mean, none of this looks necessary for me to do really anything to. And like I said, it's super easy to do, so it's great for beginners. Now as far as this fat cap, you can take it down if you want. What I like to do is usually just put some nice scoring marks into it, like so, onto the fat. And then when you're actually cooking it, we're going to put this fat towards the heat source. So if you're in an offset and the heat's coming from above, you have it sticking upwards. If you're at a pellet smoker and your heat's coming from below, have this facing downwards. But the point is to protect your meat by having this nice little fat cap on there. Now if you watched any of my videos before, you know the first thing that I like to do is salt down my meat. Now I usually go with a ratio of about a half a teaspoon of kosher salt per pound of trimmed meat. There is a big bone in here because it is a bone and butt, so you can go a little bit less or you can go a little bit more if you're into saltier food. But we are going to put sauce on these, so you don't need to go too crazy with the salt. One thing worth noting, when you're putting the salt on, the fat's not really going to absorb it, so I usually don't put a lot of effort into this side. I spend most of my attention over here on the meat side. Get it all coated down with salt. And of course, guys, that means do the sides. Now with that done, what I do now is I just sit and wait. I wait for all the salt to get absorbed, and then we'll come back and put our rub on. Now in the meantime, it's time to get that smoker going. Now the goal of using the slow and sear is to have two zones, right? We want to have our direct zone of heat and our indirect zone. We're going to cook our pork butt over here, and we're going to have our fire on this side. Now the first thing I'm going to do is fill up my water pan with some hot water. Then I'm going to pop open my grate and pour a whole bunch of briquettes in. Now I purposefully left a gap on the end because this is where we're going to put the lit briquettes. To get her started, I'm just going to put 2 fire starters down. Then I'm going to toss about 10 unlit briquettes into our chimney. Lastly, you're just going to light these little suckers. And throw our chimney on top. The coals in our chimney have nicely ashed over, which means we can get them into the slow and sear. So I'm going to take them all and put them on the far end, just like so. Now I'm going to close the bottom vent to about half and the top to about half as well and see where that evens out. I'm looking for about 250 as the cooking temperature for this cook. All of our salt has been absorbed into our piggy, so it's time to get our rub going. I'm going with my Supernova coffee rub. It's really simple to make. I'm sure you have all the ingredients at home, and it's really, really good, especially if you plan on putting a barbecue sauce on at the end. I will have all the instructions, as always, down below. As you notice, I'm not using a binder. I don't really think it's necessary, especially if you do the salting first, because that draws out a lot of moisture, which gives something for your rub to adhere to. It is important to note, guys, that if you followed my first step and then you plan on using a commercial rub, you might have way too salty food. You want to make sure that the rub that you're using, if you salt first, has no added sodium. Now I'm just going to get everything nice and coated down. And since there's no salt in here, you can really go ham, as it were. There's no concern about over-salting at this point. But just like with the salt, I want to pay particular attention to the meat side, because that's where most of the flavor is going to come from, because that's where everything's going to really adhere. The fat side, as it renders, is just going to have a lot of that rub kind of fall off. So the meat side is where you want to get most adhesion. It's going to be the prettiest. It's where you're going to get most of the flavor. But just make sure everything's coated down. Now you can just wait, let this thing sit in your fridge overnight, let everything come together, or it can go directly onto whatever smoker you're using. In my case, I've got my machine heating up right now. We're at about 190 degrees. Once we get to about 225, 250, this is going right on. I'm going to monitor this with my ThermoWorks smoke. So I'm going to get a nice probe in there. You just want to make sure that you're not directly touching the bone, which is about right here, because that might give you some off temps. So somewhere in the middle is where you're going to put your probe. And now we're just going to wait until we're ready to throw her on. Okay, I just put our pork on. Now, to turn this from a low and slow cook to actually smoking it means that we need to actually get some real wood on here. And if you've ever had something smoked that's really not great, it's kind of acrid, that's probably because they had dirty smoke on there. Now, I do have a couple of tricks to help you guys out. For starters, when using wood chunks, I always put them on closer to the fire, but not actually burning for a while. I usually do them like 45 minutes. I put these on actually right after I got our coals lit, just to get them nice and warmed up. Because when you put them in there, we want them to pretty much instantly ignite. We don't want them to smolder, because that's what creates that acrid smoke. So I just got one of our chunks. I'm going to put her nice into the coals. That's going to burst into flames, and it's going to give us the smoke that we're looking for. And I'm going to replace it with another chunk right here. You also want to make sure that you are using nice and cold meat, because that allows more adhesion, allows more of that smoke ring to develop. So this looks good. I'm going to close her up, let it sit in that smoke, and we'll come back. My goal is to let it run until the bark sets, which will probably be like maybe 3 hours, and at that point we'll begin spritzing. We are about 3 hours in, and I think my bark is set. So at this point you can start blasting it with some spritz if you want. The top looks completely fine to me. I'm more worried about maybe this side over here where most of the direct heat is hitting. Probably going to hit that with some spritz. For spritz, I tend to use hard apple cider. There's plenty of different thoughts on that. That's just what I like to use. Sometimes I use light beer. Now, as we're going forward in this cook, I'm keeping around 250, 275, like I said. But as the coals start to come this way and burn off, I'm going to start to add more in so then they go back the other direction. That way I can pretty much prolong this indefinitely. So at this point, we're about maybe right here. I'm going to start to put some on this side. So my intention is to take this into the stall. That'll be somewhere around 155, 170 in there. And that's what I'm going to wrap it. And I'll show you how to do that when we get there. And there will be a point actually where these stop taking on smoke. But until then, I'm going to keep putting on chunks. So maybe like 4 hours-ish, honestly, they'll stop taking smoke. Temperature, maybe somewhere around 150. But I'm going to keep putting on chunks until we wrap it. And just let it keep getting some of that flavor. And like I said, I'm probably going to blast this side just to make sure it doesn't dry out too much. I just pulled this off the smoker because it has officially hit the stall. Internal temperature is around 165 degrees, which is about what I expected. So what we're going to do now is wrap it. That's going to accomplish two things. One, having it in a tray like this when it starts to fall apart means it's not going to go through your grates. And two, we're going to basically start to steam it, which is going to drastically increase the cooking speed and make it so that it doesn't take a million more hours to finish this off. One of the other benefits of wrapping it, we can also add some stuff to it. So I'm going to take some of the apple cider that I was using to spritz it and add it into the container. That gives some liquid so that it has something to do that steaming. You don't need a ton, just a little bit. And if you looked at the rub that I used, you'll see that there wasn't a lot of sugar in there. I'm going to add brown sugar to the top of this. As it steams, it'll melt into the meat and give it a nice sweet flavor. You don't have to go too much, just a little bit. And by a little bit, this is actually a ton of sugar. But it's a lot of meat, guys. And then lastly, I like to add some fat back in. In this case, I'm just going to use butter. If you have lard, that'll work. Tallow, ghee, you know, anything with some fat. Now the last thing we want to do is just get it nice and tightly covered. The tighter you get it, the less air in there that needs to warm up. But that should be perfect. Get it pretty airtight. You don't want any of the gases escaping, and you don't want any evaporation of that liquid to come out. You want it to be nice and airtight. I am going to poke through it with my temperature probe so I can get a good reading. We're looking for somewhere a little bit north of 200. Now, at this point, you don't have to go back on the grill. Since we have it all closed up, you're not going to get any of that more smoke flavor. So you could throw this in the oven if you want. You could throw it onto your grill, which is what I'm going to do. You could throw it onto a gas grill. You can do whatever you want. But basically, we're just baking it now. So any type of implement will work fine. 275 is probably a good spot. You could even bump it up to 3 if you really wanted to. I'm going to try and stick them in that 250, 275 range. But this is now going to go back onto the kettle. Now I think it's time to whip together some bao buns. So I'm going to go in with some active yeast, some granulated sugar, some warm milk and water, and some olive oil. Give that a nice little mixy-mixy. We just want to leave this for like 5-10 minutes until it starts bubbling. That shows that the yeast is alive and working. And then we can go ahead and mix together our flour. A couple of minutes later, and there is a nice foam on top of our yeasties, which means they are alive and ready to go. So I've got our flour, salt, a little bit of sugar, and our baking powder in here. I'm just going to add in our little slurry here. Get it all in there. And then I'm just gonna run this on, 2 or 3 for Honestly, 5-10 minutes. All I want is for the consistency to be pretty smooth and not overly sticky. And I'm using just a dough hook. So let's just run it. Usually helps if you plug it in first. And just like that, we're done. Not overly sticky. As you can see, it's not sticking to my hand or anything. I had to add a little bit more water in, but sometimes you need more water, sometimes you need more flour. Get it to the right consistency. It is nice and elastic, not overly sticky. But what I'm gonna do now is I'm going to put it back into the bowl and let it just double in size. Basically, I'm just gonna leave it covered for about 3 hours. And then we'll go ahead with actually making these into the little buns that we all know and love. All right, temperature is hitting about 200 degrees. So I'm gonna check to see just how tender everything is and if it's time to pull it. Oh yeah, okay. So this is definitely done. This is about 7.5 hours on the smoker, guys, from start to pulling it. Now, it is only a little after 4, so I'm not quite ready to eat this yet. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna just have it hold. What you can do is put it in, you know, just a warm oven. That's what I'm gonna do. You could do a cooler, or you could just, you know, wrap it in towels and leave it on the counter, I suppose. But a toaster oven should fit this, and I'm gonna put it on about 130 degrees, and then just hold it until we're ready to actually shred it and eat it. All right, let's quickly get these bao buns finished off, guys. What we wanna do is get a little bit of flour, lay it on a nice flat surface, get ourselves a rolling pin, and then find yourself a cup that has about a 3-inch diameter. What we're gonna do is we're going to roll out our dough to about maybe a 1/4 inch thick. Use this cup or whatever you've got, it's about 3 inches, to make nice circles. Then we're gonna take those circles and put them directly onto parchment paper, cover it with another sheet of parchment paper, and then just let it sit for, honestly, about half an hour, 45 minutes. Let everything relax. And then we'll move forward with actually steaming them off. So here's our dough. Get our rolling pin, coat it down with some flour. Take our cup. That's about the thickness we want, guys, and that looks perfect. Like I said, directly under parchment paper and let them rest. This little porky butt has gotten a nice 2-hour rest, and that's really what you're looking for, guys. You want that bone to come out very easily with 0 resistance. So now we're just gonna shred her. I've said it before on this channel, guys, if you wanna shred your meats, your best bet is to get some of these glove liners and some black gloves. It works out pretty well. But we're just trying to pull apart the major muscle pieces here. There's not a lot of big fat. If you had some huge chunks of fat that you didn't want to pull off when you were shredding or when you were trimming it, this is the point where you want to pull them off, but this is actually pretty good. Oh my Lanta, that looks good. Look at that. Good smoke ring on here. Honestly, this isn't even difficult to pull apart. This just wants to come apart. Look at that. Give myself a little chef's piece. Yummy. All right, with this all nice and pulled, at this point, you can put it on to whatever you want to do to eat it. We are going to make our Bao Buns now. But yeah, this is ready to go. If you want to pull this ahead of time and your intention is to bring your food somewhere, at this point you could put it back in your tin foil and just reheat it. You can do it on a stove, sous vide, anything. But it is ready to go at this point. Good flavor, everything's perfect. Let's go ahead with making our dinner tonight, guys. Now to close out these Bao Buns, guys, they've been sitting for about half an hour. All we're gonna do is take one of them, coat one side in olive oil, fold it in half, and put it onto your steamer. We're gonna fill this all up, and then you're gonna run your steamer for about 15 minutes with boiling water, obviously, underneath it. And that should bring them to the point where they're ready to go. That's all you need to do for these. They're super simple. I'm just gonna fill this up, run them, then let's see how we did. So cook time on the pulled pork was a little over 7.5 hours. The Bao Buns took maybe 15 minutes to actually do, but we had to make them and then let them rest, all that fun stuff. Not too much effort. As far as what I'm plating them with, I made a homemade barbecue sauce. Then I also took some coleslaw, add some barbecue to that, made a barbecue slaw, threw it all together and put it onto a bun. And this is the result. Absolutely perfect, beautiful looking. But most importantly, the proof is in the pudding. Let's see how we did. delicious. This is my go-to with a pulled pork. I like this coffee rub. I love this barbecue sauce. It all comes together to make a really, really good flavor. And if you add in some coleslaw with some barbecue sauce on top, it's a really, really good flavor profile. These bao buns we've been doing more and more frequently. They are super, super good and fantastic if you do them with something Asian or with just barbecue. For you guys following along at home, if you just bought an SnS Slow and Sear kit for your Weber Kettle, super easy to use. I hope you got something useful out of that. And I'd love to hear down below, what are your guys' thoughts on pulled pork? Do you ever do sort of a Asian style or throw it in a bun, or do you always just do like sliders just on the plate? Be super interested to know how you guys plate your pulled pork. As always, guys, that YouTube shenanigans, like, comment, subscribe, all the dumb stuff, but it makes me feel super warm and fuzzy on the insides. But most importantly, cook something fantastic, and I'll see you on the next barbecue. Bye-bye.